Courtney. Welcome to Thursday Thrive. This is a series featuring people who have overcome adversity. If you want to know more about what it means to thrive or to see more stories, then check us out at edmondco.co. I hope you enjoy this story.
Okay, I'm Caitlin, and this is my story. I was born in South Carolina, and I grew up with, mom, dad, and younger brother, so we were kind of like that all-American family. Grew up in the country. I grew up on a converted pig farm, so way out in the country. I think our closest neighbor was like a mile or two away. So my brother and I, we grew up always outside. We didn't grow up with cable or air conditioning or any of that, so we were always outside running around and getting into trouble. My mom, I love her dearly. She's my best friend, and I call her my soulmate because we're so similar. If you've ever seen the TV show Gilmore Girls, I feel like that's us. Like, we just talk the same. We have the same sense of humor. I can tell her anything, and she was always there through my childhood. Every dance recital, every day. I mean, she was a teacher, so she would pick us up every day and take us, to whatever we had going on after school. And I just always remember my mother being there every single second. And then my dad was bipolar and really depressed and had a lot of anxiety. And none of those things were his fault. How he dealt with it, I think, was his fault. So my dad was emotionally abusive, and it's taken me a long time to say that. Like, my dad was abusive. Growing up with him, I don't have any memories of him laughing. I don't have any memories of him, just joking around. I barely remember what he looks like when he smiles. What I remember is years and years of tantrums and big explosive fights and yelling, and as I got older, the insults, and my dad constantly telling my brother and I that we were not good enough, that we were ungrateful, or we were spoiled, or we were just bad. We were bad kids. And so that was hard as a child, because I think when you grow up, your parents are your stability. And so I had one parent, my mother, who was perfect in every way and just so loving and gracious, and taught me so much about kindness and courage and just love, and how you treat people when you love them. And then my dad kind of taught me everything I don't want to be. So by the time I was 12 or so, my dad had talked about killing himself probably, I can't even count the number of times. I mean, one of my earliest memories with my father is him having a mental breakdown and me just hearing him sobbing and saying he wasn't good enough. He wasn't meant to be a father. And that's really hard when you're a kid and your dad's telling you that he wasn't meant to be a dad, and so you feel like, well, I'm not meant to be here. I'm not wanted. My mother got in a really bad car accident. She was driving along the highway and stopped at a stop sign, and a dump truck rear-ended her, going almost full speed, so it was really bad. And I just remember my dad coming to pick us up and taking us to the hospital and dumping my brother and I in the waiting room in the ER and leaving to go take care of my mom, but not telling us anything. And I remember sitting in that ER for hours and hours, and no one told me anything. I didn't know whether she was alive. I didn't know whether she was gone. I just knew that I might lose her. And that was really scary, because my mother, she was the only parent that I had. I felt like she was the only one who cared and the only one who loved me, and not knowing if I was going to be able to keep her was devastating. So I sat in that ER room and I prayed for the first time in my life. And I prayed, oh my goodness, like curled up in a chair, to a God that I didn't know. I'd heard him called God the Father. And to me, a father was someone who was going to hurt you, whether you deserved it or not. So I prayed to him almost like I was talking to my dad. And whenever I would talk to my dad growing up, it was always like a bargain kind of thing. It was like, all right, I'm going to try really hard not to tick you off, and in return, you're not going to hurt me. So I just remember sitting in that chair in the ER and just praying like so hard, just please don't take her. If you let me keep her, I will do anything. Over and over and over again. And turns out it wasn't as dramatic as my little 12-year-old. I mean, my mother came home that night, but I didn't know that. So I kind of, when she came home, I was left with this bargain that I had made with this God that I didn't know in the slightest. But I had told him, if you let me keep her, I will give my life to you. So after that, I would pray every single night. But no one had ever taught me how to pray, you know. So praying to this God, I would pray for forgiveness for whatever I felt like I was doing that was angering him, or that he might punish me by taking away someone I loved or something I loved. I would just pray for protection. It was almost like a mantra every night. And that went on. By the time I was in high school, I had, you know, things with my dad had gotten really bad. He was in a really bad place, to the point that just being home was a little bit of mental torture, because you never knew who you were walking in the door to. It might be a good day, and you might come home and he might be talking about getting in the truck and just driving off to the nearest tree and ramming the truck into the tree. Like, that's the kind of stories he would say, like, you know, don't come home, he would tell my mother, don't let the kids come in the door first tonight, you know, before we'd go to school. And so you're at school all day like, okay, am I gonna come home and find my dad dead, kind of thing. It just was awful. When I was in college, my dad hit a low point. He ended up moving to Hawaii for a little while, ended up moving to Russia for a little while, and just was very, very much gone. And I kind of, for the longest time, I teetered between this line of, I wanted to love him so hard because I didn't know when was the last time I was going to see him. But at the same time, I was growing up and I wanted so bad to ignore it. So I remember being in college, and at the time my relationship with my boyfriend was at a low point. My senior year, I remember we went to church one day together. And I was at a really low point. I was really lost and broken, and you never would have known it to look at me. I mean, I was just wasting away in unhappiness. But on the outside, I wanted to pretend like everything was okay. And I remember we were at church, and I don't even remember what the sermon was about, to be honest, but I just remember I had this moment where I felt so alone in this church with, you know, probably 100 people there, and my boyfriend standing right next to me, and I just felt so alone. And I remember I prayed, not that mantra that I'd been praying for so long to protect my loved ones, but I just talked to God and begged him to just give me some sort of sign that I wasn't alone, that he was there, that he had heard me since I was 12 years old, that I wasn't praying to another father that was going to abandon me. And so I remember I'm talking, and there was this moment where it was the smallest and yet stillest voice I'd ever heard in my life. And it cut off it was almost like a stream of consciousness. I was talking to God, and there was this moment where this voice popped up in me, in my head, in my heart, in my veins. Like, it just completely filled me. And before I could even kind of finish my train of thought, I just heard, I am. And it was there, and it was gone just as quick. I mean, in the span of like a heartbeat. And it changed my life, because I'm sitting there and I heard that voice, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I think I just heard God. And I was filled with the most incredible peace in that moment. I felt like I breathed for the first time in a long time, and I just knew in that second, I knew with every fiber of my being that I'd heard him, and he was there, and he was wrapping his arms around me saying, I'm here. It's gonna be hard, but I'm here with you. I went through a really hard breakup with my first love, and my dad ended up coming back from Hawaii and staying with us for a little while. And I fell into that same pattern. I let him come back, and I opened myself up to that relationship again, and he just kept hurting me and kept hurting me. And everything that I had tried so hard to build with God the Father, my earthly father came back and tore it all down. And I remember he moved to Pennsylvania for a little while, and I remember he getting a call that he had tried to kill himself, and he'd gotten really close. He'd taken a bunch of pills, and he was alone, and one of his coworkers at the time found him. And I remember being 22 and had just gone through this breakup, and had just graduated college, kind of the great unknown, didn't really know what was next for me. And I just had this moment, this very clear moment, where it's like all the hurt and all the pain from my childhood and all the just abuse that I had tolerated for so long, it came to a head when I got that call. And so I remember I called him in the hospital. He was in the hospital for a couple days, and I called him, and I can only attribute it now to just the Holy Spirit giving me courage, because I told him everything that I'd ever wanted to say to him. It was like a 2-hour conversation on the phone, and I told him, every time that I could remember he'd ever hurt me, and how I just wanted my dad. I just wanted a dad to love me and tell me I was enough, and to be there for me and be consistent and generous and loving. And he wasn't that. And I remember at the end of the phone call, he listened to it all very patiently, which was not like him. And I remember at the end of the phone call, he just said, I'm so sorry, and I love you so much. And I just remember thinking, my prayers are answered. It's going to change. And I was so happy hanging up. I just remember having so much hope when I hung up that phone. And then 24 hours later, he called me back, and I talked to him, and I kind of was like, yeah, like, I'm so thankful that, we spoke on the phone. I'm so thankful that we're going to try to be different. We're going to try and get better. And I remember him saying, what phone call? What conversation? And my heart just stopped. And he claimed he didn't remember any of it. He was like, I very clearly remember him saying, you sure that you didn't dream it? And so he didn't remember the conversation, and something in me snapped. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. I can't be in your life, and you can't be in mine anymore. I was so tired of being hurt, and I was so tired of not growing, and I knew if I kept him in my life and let him keep tearing me down, I was never gonna be the kind of woman that I wanted to be. And so that was really hard, at 22 years old, to sit there and tell your father, I can't see you anymore. I can't talk to you. And I told him how much I loved him, because I do. I will always love him. He's my dad. But I told him it ends today. And I would like to say that I made that decision and it was all sunshine and rainbows afterwards, but what the truth is there was a lot of valley after that. That was kind of the first step. I leaned into God really hard during that time. But I was scared. I was so broken and so damaged, and I didn't want another father to come in. So I kept praying and I kept reading the word, but it was without passion. It was without heart. And I was so afraid that if I let God in to see my brokenness, that he wouldn't want me and he would abandon me. Because in my head, that's what fathers did. Fathers hurt you, and fathers told you you were not enough and that you were not special and you were not worthy. I met a guy when I was 23, 24, almost 24. Met a guy. We fell very deeply in love very quickly. He was also a great person, and he, for the first time in my life, encouraged me to talk about my relationship with Jesus, and I will always be grateful to him for that. He came into my life at a time when I really needed some guidance, and he gave that to me. So we would talk about, God. We would talk about God as the Father. We would talk about how, my ex used to always say, like, God's a gentleman, and he'll knock at the door. He's not going to break it down. And so I totally believe that. And where I was in my life at the time, I would crack the door open, but I didn't want to let God all the way in. And so ended up moving to Florida to be with that guy, and we experienced a lot of joy and a lot of pain and a lot of sadness and a lot of growth together. But again, I had a hole in me, and I wanted everything but God to fill it. So slowly but surely, God started taking away the things that made me feel secure. My relationship started becoming really unstable. I had a hard time making friends. I experienced a lot of loneliness, a lot of isolation. And I remember that whole time I kept feeling God pull at my heart. That voice that I had felt when I was 22 years old, that still soft voice, it was always in me. And I kept feeling this pull of just stop fighting it and come to me. And I'm stubborn, so I kept fighting it until literally he brought me to my lowest point. My boyfriend ended up breaking up with me, and at that time, that was my world. I didn't have any friends. My family was in Virginia. I was by myself in Florida, and now I was alone, and I had no idea what to do. And I remember sitting in the shower the night that we had broken up, and I'm just bawling my eyes out. I mean, the ugly cry, like the awful, just heaving sobs, like. And I remember just praying and saying, Father, love me. And that was the first time in my life that I had to ever talk to God as my Father. That was the first time that I'd ever truly asked him to see my heart and see where I was and love me anyway. And it wasn't, nothing crazy happened. I didn't hear this crazy voice again or anything like that, but I just had it was like something clicked in me. And I finally realized that I had had a father the whole time. And so I started praying to that Father. I started, for the first time in my life, really honestly asking him to come into my brokenness and asking him to fill up every part of my soul and fill up all the places where I was jagged, just bring all those pieces together and make me whole. Ended up getting back with the boyfriend. We moved to Nashville, but I was different. And as soon as I moved to Nashville, I knew exactly the woman that I wanted to be. I knew exactly what God was calling me to do. He was calling me to love people and reach out and find people that needed something, that were searching for something, and to just walk with them on their journey. And so I found a really good faith community in Nashville, I found really good opportunities to serve, and so I started putting myself back together and just really leaning on God, and it was wonderful. It was my biggest joy was just the time that I spent every day just talking to Him and reading the Word and getting to know more about this Father that I had always had but never known. And you know, after about 6 months of being in Nashville, it became really clear that my relationship wasn't healthy with my boyfriend. My heart just didn't belong to him anymore. I was different, and we ended up breaking up. And you know, it was a temptation to go back to that loneliness and fear of the future. But this time, I had so much joy because I'd found God, and I'd found the relationship that made me whole, that made me feel like I was complete, and that relationship can't ever end. So I guess one of the initial fears that I had was obviously that I wasn't enough, that something about me was not made to be loved, something about me was not special enough or good enough. And then a fear that I honestly am still kind of struggling with is admitting that what my dad did to me was abuse. I feel like I read so much and see so many stories, and there's so much pain in the world, and for a long time I felt like my pain wasn't valid, that, you know, because he had never hit me, he'd never abused me. And it took me a lot of time and thought and prayer to come to the realization that, you know what he did wasn't okay. And as a parent, your one job is to love your child, and he didn't do that. I think my biggest piece of advice is, at some point you have to take responsibility for your own happiness. I let my dad hurt me and control me and manipulate me for far longer than I should have. And I think at some point everybody on this earth has to realize that you're in control of your own life. It's your choice who you let in. It's your choice who you let love you and love you well. And if someone's hurting you, it's your choice to let them go. I think my biggest realization was there's a huge difference between being Christ-like and being Christ. It was never my job to fix my dad. I honestly think that if I had not gone through so much pain and so much loss and heartache, that I never would have found God. I never would have opened that door fully and allowed Him to come in, because I really think I had to come to my lowest point to realize how badly I needed Him and how much I needed what only He could offer, and nothing else was going to fill it. No friendships, relationships, other family members, nothing was going to fill it but Jesus.